But it was his dream, Samuel. Our Jimmy's dream. How can they say it's worthless? The old woman's voice, a fragile whisper laced with disbelief, sliced through the polished hum of the luxury car showroom. Her husband's hand tightened on hers. His silence, a heavier burden than any shouted word. A few feet away, the quiet man in the worn baseball cap, the one who'd been idly examining the glossy finish of a sedan, suddenly went still. Utterly. Cold. A moment of reckoning is clearly at hand, a silence that speaks volumes. If you're as compelled as we are to discover what lies behind that chilling stillness and witness the incredible journey that follows, we warmly invite you to subscribe so you don't miss a single revelation. What does this powerful scene make you feel right now? We'd be honored if you'd share your heart and initial thoughts with us in the comments below. The reflection staring back at Arthur Vance from the cheap motel mirror was a stranger. Gone was the impeccably tailored suit, the confident gleam of a CEO who commanded boardrooms and navigated multi-million-dollar deals for Vance Automotive. In its place stood Art a man, a few years cevichos his carefully chosen second-hand clothes, hanging a little awkwardly on a frame, more accustomed to bespoke tailoring. He ran a hand through his slightly disheveled hair, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Well, Art," he murmured to the unfamiliar face, "let's see if that MBA covers advanced coffee-making and the subtle art of looking inconspicuous." Beneath the self-deprecating humor, a familiar disquiet gnawed at him. Vance Automotive was a titan, its sales figures a testament to his business acumen. Yet the numbers, however impressive, felt hollow. Whispers of customer dissatisfaction had begun to reach his insulated office, vague complaints that were easily dismissed by regional managers, eager to paint a rosy picture. But it was more than that. It was the echo of his late father's voice, a man who had built the company from a single garage, with the motto, "A car is a milestone, son. But the people, they're the journey." Lately that journey felt like it had lost its way, veering onto a path paved with profit margins rather than principles. A recent unsettling story about a lifelong friend, nearly ruined by predatory business practices elsewhere, had been the final catalyst. Arthur needed to see, to feel the truth of his own company unfiltered. His flagship dealership, a gleaming palace of chrome and glass, was his chosen stage. As Art, the hopeful applicant for a vaguely defined general assistant role, a position he'd had his HR discreetly ensure was open, he walked through the automatic doors. The scent of new cars and expensive air freshener filled his nostrils, a familiar perfume. Yet today, it felt alien. The showroom buzzed with a forced energy salespeople in sharp suits, gliding like sharks, their smiles a little too bright, their eyes a little too calculating. He was directed to a young, eager salesman named Ben Cooper. Ben, barely out of his 20s, had a bright, open face and an earnestness that Arthur found instantly likable if a little naive. So Mr. Art Ben said, his voice a little too loud in his attempt to sound professional, "You're here for the, assistant position. Great. We can always use an extra pair of hands, especially for things." He gestured vaguely around the bustling showroom. Arthur, playing his part, nodded humbly. "Just Art is fine. And yes, happy to help wherever I can. Been out of the workforce for a bit, looking to get back on my feet." Ben, bless his heart, bought it hook, line, and sinker. His first assignment for Art was a testament to his pressing need for assistance with things making coffee for a particularly demanding client. Arthur, a man whose personal assistant usually anticipated his every beverage need, found himself staring blankly at a complicated industrial-looking machine. "Right," he muttered under his breath, "just like launching a new car model, only with more steam and a higher chance of scalding. His first attempt produced something that looked and smelled suspiciously like hot brown water. Ben, ever polite, took a sip, coughed discreetly, and declared it interestingly robust. Arthur made a mental note to send Ben on an advanced barista course if he ever got out of this disguise. His days as Art unfolded with a series of such minor indignities and major revelations. He swept floors, ran errands, and most importantly, he listened. He heard the hushed conversations between salespeople, the subtle pressure tactics, the carefully glossed-over details in contracts. He met Frank Murray, a veteran salesman whose face was a roadmap of tired resignation. Frank rarely spoke, but his occasional dry, cynical remarks to Art during a shared, hurried lunch break spoke volumes. This place. Art Frank had grumbled one day, stirring sugarless coffee. It's all about the numbers now. Used to be about fitting the right car to the right family. Now it's fitting the right financing package to the highest bidder. From his assistant's vantage point, often near the main sales floor, Arthur also had a clear view of Victor Vic Stratton, the dealership's sales manager. Stratton was a peacock of a man, all flashy suits, expensive cologne, and a voice that could charm a snake or bully a saint. He moved through the showroom with an air of predatory ownership, his eyes constantly scanning for the next big fish. Arthur felt an instinctive dislike for the man, a prickle of unease whenever Stratton was near. Vic represented everything Arthur feared his company might be becoming. Late one afternoon, as Arthur was ostensibly organizing a neglected pile of brochures, a task he'd assigned himself, to better observe the showroom floor, the main doors slid open. An elderly couple, Samuel and Eleanor Peterson, shuffled in. They looked a little lost amidst the gleaming new models, their clothes neat but well worn. Samuel held his wife's hand tightly, his gaze sweeping across the expensive cars with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Parked just outside, visible through the vast window, was their car, an older sedan clearly from a bygone era, but impeccably maintained its paintwork, still holding a soft, proud sheen. It was the kind of car that whispered of a lifetime of memories of family trips and first dates, a car that had clearly been someone's pride and joy, perhaps even their dream car once upon a time. Arthur watched as Vic Stratton, who had been preening near his glass-walled office, spotted the Petersons. A slow, calculating smile spread across Vic's face. He straightened his tie, smoothed his already perfect hair, and began to move towards them, his gait a little too eager, his eyes holding a gleam that made Arthur's stomach clench. The Art persona faded for a moment, and Arthur Vance, the CEO, felt a cold dread mixed with a grim sort of anticipation. The real test he sensed was about to begin. Victor Vic Stratton descended upon Samuel and Eleanor Peterson like a hawk spotting a particularly vulnerable pair of sparrows. His smile, which Arthur had come to recognize as a predatory baring of teeth, was firmly in place. "Good afternoon, folks." Vic boomed his voice a little too loud, a little too slick. "What magnificent piece of automotive history have we here?" He circled their old sedan, a car that, despite its age, radiated a quiet dignity. Its chrome lovingly polished its lines, speaking of a simpler, more earnest era of design. Samuel Peterson, a man whose hands bore the markings of a lifetime of honest work, cleared his throat. "It's our son's car," he said, his voice soft, but laced with an undeniable pride. "Our Jimmy's. We're thinking it might be time to trade it in for something a little smaller, a little easier for Eleanor to manage." Eleanor nodded, her gaze fixed on the car with a heartbreaking tenderness. He always called it his dream car. Kept it like a palace, he did. Vic tapped a manicured fingernail on the hood. "Charming, absolutely charming," he conceded, though his eyes betrayed a swift, dismissive calculation. Of course, in this market, charming and sentimental value don't always. Well, they don't exactly show up on the balance sheet, if you catch my drift. He then launched into a practiced monologue about depreciation, market saturation of older models, and the generous offer he was about to make. Arthur Still Art busied himself nearby, ostensibly wiping down a gleaming SUV, but his attention was riveted on the unfolding scene. If this is Vic's master class in customer-centric valuation, Arthur mused internally, his grip tightening on the cleaning cloth, then Vance Automotive's entire training manual needs an emergency recall. The generous offer Vic finally presented was, as Arthur had grimly anticipated, an insult. A figure so low it was clear Vic saw the Petersons not as valued customers, but as an easy mark. Samuel's face fell, the hope draining from his eyes. Eleanor's lower lip began to tremble. "But it runs perfectly," Samuel stammered. "Jimmy took such good care of it. We have all the service records. Records schmecords." Vic waved a dismissive hand. "It's an old vehicle, my friend. Parts are scarce. The emissions probably sing opera. I'm practically doing you a favor, taking it off your hands." That was when Art decided his observational phase was over. He ambled over a friendly, almost apologetic smile on his face. "Excuse me, gentlemen, Mrs. Peterson," he interjected, his voice mild. "Couldn't help but overhear. And I must say, he ran an appreciative hand over the fender of the old sedan. This is a truly beautiful machine. They really don't make them with this kind of soul anymore." Vic shot Art a look that could curdle milk. "And you are just someone who appreciates classic craftsmanship," Art replied, his eyes on the car. "I dabble a bit, you know. My grandfather had one similar. If you're considering selling, I might be interested myself. For a personal collection, of course." Samuel and Eleanor looked at Art with a flicker of renewed hope. Vic, however, was incensed. "Look, pal," he began, stepping aggressively towards Art. "This is a professional dealership, not a flea market. These good people are my clients." "And as your clients," Art said, his gaze unwavering but his tone still polite, "I'm sure they'd appreciate knowing all their options. This model in this condition, it's quite sought after by a niche group." He then named a price, a figure substantially higher than Vic's, a price that was fair, perhaps even a little generous for such a well-preserved classic. Eleanor gasped softly. Samuel stared, momentarily speechless. Vic's jaw practically hit the polished showroom floor. He looked Art up and down from his worn shoes to his simple shirt, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You're offering that for this antique? Every car has its story and its worth, wouldn't you agree?" Art said, meeting Vic's glare. He then turned to the Petersons. "If you'd allow me, I'd be honored to give this vehicle a new home where it will be cherished." While Vic sputtered, trying to regain control, Ben Cooper, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, anxious eyes, subtly pushed a brochure for a local classic car club, Uslugi, for Art to see a silent message of encouragement. Arthur gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. Frank Murray, from his post, further away, simply shook his head slowly, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps reluctant admiration, perhaps weary cynicism, in his eyes. Later, as Arthur Still Art finalized the private purchase with the Petersons in a quiet corner of the waiting area, using a preloaded debit card his CFO had reluctantly arranged for contingencies, Eleanor, her eyes shining with unshed tears, finally shared their son's story. Jimmy had been a firefighter, a local hero, Energy, who had poured every spare cent and countless hours into restoring his dream car, this very sedan. He'd died in the line of duty a few years prior, and the car was their last tangible connection to him. He always said, "One day, Mum, this car will be a classic, a real head-turner, a piece of history," Eleanor whispered, clutching Samuel's hand. You see that too, don't you, Art? I do." Eleanor Arthur said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "I absolutely do, and I promise you, Jimmy's dream will be in good hands." The Petersons left a short while later, their relief palpable, their gratitude overflowing. As their old sedan, now with a new respectful owner, was carefully driven away by a trusted contact Arthur had discreetly called Vic Stratton, cornered Art near the coffee station, the site of Arthur's earlier culinary misadventures. Vic's face was a mask of controlled fury. "I don't know who you really are." "Art," he hissed, jabbing a finger, Savicios Art's chest. "Or what little game you're playing, showing me up in front of my own staff and interfering with my customers. But you and I were going to have a serious conversation. Right now." Arthur met his gaze, a calm, steady look that seemed to unnerve Vic more than any shouted retort would have. "I believe we are, Mr. Stratton." Arthur replied, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight, a very serious one indeed. "Perhaps you can start by telling me if the coffee in your office is any better than the brew downstairs, because frankly, that was an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy." Victor Stratton's office was a shrine to his own perceived importance. Framed awards, mostly for top salesmen from years past, Arthur noted with an internal grimace, adorned the walls alongside a comically oversized photo of Vic shaking hands with a minor local celebrity. Vic sank into his plush leather chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he gestured for Art to take the far less comfortable seat opposite him. The air conditioning hummed a stark contrast to the simmering tension. "So, Art." Vic began leaning back and steepling his fingers, the picture of a man in complete control. "You've been quite the busy bee today, haven't you? Causing a bit of a ruckus on my sales floor. You think you're some kind of hero stepping in like that? Let me tell you how things work around here." He launched into a condescending lecture about sales targets, customer psychology, his version of it at least, which seemed to involve maximum pressure and minimal empathy and the real world of car sales. Arthur listened patiently, his expressions unreadable. Internally, he was cataloguing every self-aggrandizing statement, every veiled threat. Vic's understanding of customer psychology, Arthur thought with a touch of dark humor, seems to be rooted in the grab 'em by the wallet and don't let go school of thought. Definitely not a chapter in any reputable business ethics textbook I've read. When Vic finally paused for breath, clearly expecting some sort of apology or at least cowering submission from Arthur leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Stratton," he said, his voice still mild, but with an underlying current of steel. "Vic was too arrogant to immediately detect your methods are unorthodox, and your assessment of that classic sedan was frankly insulting, not just to Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, but to anyone who values honesty." Vic scoffed. "Honesty, pal, this is sales. This is about closing the deal, hitting the numbers. You wouldn't understand. Now about your little stunt today. I'm afraid your dabbling days at this dealership are over. Consider this your termination." He waved a dismissive hand, already reaching for his phone, presumably to call security, or perhaps to boast to an underling about how he'd dealt with the troublemaker. Actually, Mr. Stratton Arthur said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of Art the mild-mannered temp. It was the voice of Arthur Vance, CEO, a voice that resonated with quiet authority. "I believe it is your tenure here that has just concluded." He reached into the inner pocket of his worn jacket and retrieved a slim, elegant business card. He placed it deliberately on the polished expanse of Vic's desk. Victor Stratton glanced at the card, then did a double-take, his eyes widening comically. He picked it up, his hand visibly trembling. Arthur Vance. CEO. Vance Automotive. He looked up at the man before him, the cheap clothes and humble demeanor suddenly irrelevant. The color drained from Vic's face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. No, this is a joke, right? You're kidding me. He let out a shaky, incredulous laugh that bordered on a squeak. I assure you, Mr. Stratton, Arthur said, his gaze unwavering, the performance of this dealership under your management is far from a laughing matter. Vic's bravado crumbled like a badly built sandcastle. He shot up from his chair, knocking over a ridiculously oversized world's best sales manager mug, a gift from himself, Arthur suspected. Coffee, a dark, sludgy brew that Arthur was glad he hadn't been offered, splashed across a stack of papers. Mr. V. Vance. Sir, I had no idea. If I'd known it was you, I can explain. The Petersons, that was just a negotiation tactic. A bit of showroom theatre. Theatre that almost cost an elderly couple a significant amount of money and a piece of their family history. Arthur countered, his voice dangerously soft. He stood up. Ben Cooper, Frank Murray, please come in. And ask Linda from HR to join us. He'd discreetly texted them moments before entering Vic's office. A bewildered Ben and a stoic Frank entered, followed by a nervous-looking HR representative. Vic looked like a trapped animal. The subsequent hour was for Arthur a grim affirmation of his worst fears. What started as an inquiry into Vic's treatment of the Petersons quickly snowballed. Ben Cooper initially hesitant, but gaining courage from Arthur's presence, and Vic's obvious deflation recounted instances where Vic had instructed salespeople to falsify trade-in assessments to push unnecessary high-commission add-ons, especially onto vulnerable customers. He called it maximizing customer investment. Sir Ben said, his voice gaining strength. Frank Murray, his face etched with years of weary complicity, finally broke his silence. He didn't offer excuses, just stark facts. There was a creative warranty program, Mr. Vance, and certain repair shops we were strongly encouraged to recommend regardless of the issue. Vic got kickbacks. We all knew. Most of us just looked the other way. Easier than losing your job when you've got a mortgage to pay. The HR representative, pale and shuffling through her notes, confirmed a string of customer complaints against Vic that had somehow never made it past his desk to corporate, often marked as resolved or customer misunderstanding. Each revelation was like another spadeful of dirt being thrown onto the coffin of Arthur's naivete. This wasn't just one bad apple. Vic had cultivated a toxic orchard. This was the painful truth. His company in this corner of his empire was sick. Finally, Arthur held up a hand, silencing the room. He looked directly at Vic Stratton, who was now slumped in his chair, a broken, sweating mess. Mr. Stratton, Arthur said, his voice calm but absolute, your employment with Vance Automotive is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your personal belongings will be packed and sent to you. Vic opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. After Vic had been unceremoniously removed, a stunned silence filled the office. Ben looked both relieved and terrified. Frank seemed to have aged another 10 years, but there was a new light in his eyes, a flicker of something long dormant. Arthur Vance surveyed the remaining staff in Vic's now vacant office. What has happened here today, he began, his voice resonating with a new, hard-won resolve, is not just the end of one man's career. It is the end of an era for this dealership. He paused, letting his words sink in. I will be personally overseeing operations here for the foreseeable future. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, there will be a mandatory all-staff meeting in the main showroom. We are going to discuss openly and honestly how we tear down this broken system and build something new, something worthy of the Vance Automotive name, something worthy of our customers. If you want to be part of that change, be there. If not, he looked pointedly around the room, consider this your opportunity to pursue other avenues. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with fear, but also for the first time, in what felt like a very long time in that office, a fragile, tentative spark of hope. Arthur knew the road ahead would be brutally difficult. This wasn't just a cleanup, it was an exorcism. The neon glow of the Vance Automotive sign cast long, lonely shadows across Victor Stratton's vacated office. Arthur Vance sat behind the ostentatious desk, now cleared of Vic's self-congratulatory trinkets, the silence of the dealership at midnight a heavy blanket. Sleep was an impossibility. He found himself pacing the plush carpet, doing little to cushion the turmoil in his mind. His father's words echoed a counterpoint to the crass pronouncements Vic had made earlier. A business built on lies, Arthur, is a house built on sand. He'd found a dusty photo album in a bottom drawer left behind by a previous, more sentimental manager, perhaps. It was filled with images of the dealership's grand opening decades ago, his father younger and beaming, cutting a ceremonial ribbon. There were pictures of staff outings, of customers proudly shaking hands over their new cars, genuine smiles all around. A stark contrast to the tense transactional atmosphere he'd witnessed. Somewhere along the line, Father Arthur murmured, tracing the outline of his father's smiling face. We started chasing the bottom line so hard, we forgot to look up at the horizon. He thought of his brief, humbling stint as Art, the coffee-making assistant. If I'd known running a single dealership from the ground up was this enlightening, he mused with a tired, wry smile, I might have scheduled these undercover operations annually, or at least invested heavily in a stronger brand of antacid. The 8 a.m. all-staff meeting arrived with a palpable sense of apprehension. The showroom, usually a stage for polished performances, felt more like a courtroom. Arthur stood before them, not behind a podium, but on the same level, his sleeves rolled up. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. "For those of you who still only know me as Art, the surprisingly inept coffee maker, allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Arthur Vance." A few nervous titters rippled through the crowd. Yesterday, he continued, his expression sobering, was a day of reckoning for this dealership. And frankly, for me, what I discovered here was a betrayal of your trust as employees, a betrayal of our customers' trust, and a betrayal of the values Vance Automotive was founded upon. He didn't shout, didn't point fingers beyond the already departed Vic, but the weight of his disappointment was clear. He then laid out his vision, not just for rectifying the wrongs, but for transforming the dealership into a model of integrity. He spoke of transparency, of fair dealings, of a new commission structure that rewarded genuine customer satisfaction and ethical conduct, not just high-pressure sales. Hands at first hesitant began to rise. A young woman from finance asked, her voice trembling slightly, "Mr. Vance, with all due respect." Vic's methods, however, questionable. They brought in numbers. Some of us have families, mortgages. How do we make a living if we're just being nice? Arthur met her gaze. That's a fair question. And the answer is we make a living by building something sustainable trust. It won't be easy. There might be a dip before there's a rise. But I'd rather have a smaller, honest profit built on a rock-solid reputation than a mountain of illicit gains on the verge of collapse. The new commission structure is designed to reward long-term customer loyalty and ethical sales. We will support you, train you, and we will succeed the right way. The rest of the morning was dedicated to the first painful steps of that rebuilding. Arthur, with Ben Cooper now by his side, looking both overwhelmed and fiercely determined, began the process of reviewing questionable past deals. The sheer volume was daunting. Then came the calls. Arthur insisted on making the first few himself. His first call was to Ms. Evans, a retiree Vic's team had pressured into an expensive, unnecessary extended warranty on a used car. Mosdens, Evans, he began after introducing himself. This is Arthur Vance, CEO of Vance Automotive. I'm calling personally regarding your purchase of a sedan last March. I've reviewed your file and, frankly, Ms. Evans, what happened was unacceptable. The warranty you were sold was not appropriate, and the manner in which it was presented was misleading. On behalf of the entire company, I want to offer my sincerest apologies. There was a stunned silence on the other end, then a skeptical, slightly quavering voice. The CEO, you're calling me. Is this some new kind of sales pitch? Because if it is, I'm hanging up. No, Miss Evans, I assure you, Arthur said gently. This is not a sales pitch. This is an apology. And it comes with an offer of a full refund for that warranty, plus a complimentary full service for your vehicle on us as a small token of our regret. Another silence, longer this time. Well, I never, Ms. Evans finally stammered, a note of cautious disbelief in her voice. That's more than I expected. By the end of the call, the ice had thawed considerably. The call to Sarah Jenkins, a young single mother who'd been hit with hidden fees, was equally challenging her initial anger palpable. But Arthur listened, genuinely listened, and by the time he had explained the situation and the company's commitment to making it right, her tone had softened into wary gratitude. Later that afternoon, Frank Murray approached Arthur's temporary desk, Vic's old one, now conspicuously free of clutter. The older salesman looked tired, but the cynicism in his eyes had been replaced by a hesitant resolve. Mr. Vance, he began, holding a worn ledger. If you're serious about cleaning this place up, Vic had a system for encouraging sales of certain high-interest financing packages, especially to first-time buyers who didn't know better. It wasn't official, but, well, here's how it worked. He opened the ledger. Figured it's about time these old bones did something more useful than just keeping a chair warm and looking the other way. He even cracked a small, dry smile. Besides, Vic's coffee really was terrible. Maybe things will improve on that front, too. Arthur accepted the ledger with a nod of gratitude. Thank you, Frank. This is invaluable. As the day drew to a close, Ben Cooper, his face alight with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, presented Arthur with a hastily scribbled list. Sir, I was thinking, after those calls today, what if we implemented a customer bill of rights and a completely transparent, no haggle, best price first policy on all our certified pre-owned vehicles? And maybe we could invest in a coffee machine for the waiting area that people actually want to get coffee from. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a genuine, unforced smile spread across Arthur Vance's face. Ben, he said, those are excellent ideas. Let's get to work on them first thing tomorrow. The road ahead was long paved with broken trust that needed mending, but as Arthur looked at the determined faces of Ben and even the newly invigorated Frank, he felt a flicker, then a steady glow of hope. The seeds had been sown. Now came the hard work of nurturing them. The months that followed Vic Stratton's dismissal were a period of intense, often exhausting, but ultimately rewarding transformation for the Vance automotive dealership. Arthur Vance, true to his word, remained deeply involved, though he gradually empowered Ben Cooper, whose natural aptitude for fair dealing and genuine customer rapport saw him quickly promoted to assistant manager. Frank Murray, his cynicism replaced by a gruff sort of pride, became an invaluable mentor to the sales team, his anecdotes about the bad old days under Vic now serving as cautionary tales, often delivered with a dry wit that kept a new generation of salespeople both entertained and educated. "Remember, folks," Frank would say during morning briefings adjusting his glasses back then, transparency meant making sure the customer could see the ridiculously high interest rate after they'd signed. We aim for a slightly different interpretation these days. There were, of course, hiccups. Some veteran salespeople, too, entrenched in the old ways of high-pressure tactics and commission at all costs, found they couldn't adapt and quietly departed. Initial sales figures saw a slight, predictable dip as the team unlearned bad habits and relearned the art of building genuine relationships. But customer satisfaction surveys began to soar. Positive online reviews. Once a rarity started to trickle, then flow in. The atmosphere in the showroom, once thick with unspoken tension, and the odor of desperation, now felt lighter, more open. Even the coffee, thanks to a new machine championed by Ben and a small anonymous donation from the CEO's contingency fund, was remarkably improved. Arthur, on his less frequent but still regular visits, allowed himself a quiet smile. This was beginning to feel like the company his father had envisioned. But in the cutthroat world of automotive retail, such a paradigm shift rarely goes unnoticed or unchallenged. News of Vance Automotive's ethical and increasingly successful turnaround eventually reached the ears of Marcus Thorne, the notoriously aggressive CEO of Thorne Motors, a sprawling chain of dealerships known for its whatever-it-takes sales philosophy. Thorne, a man who viewed business as a battlefield and customers as territories to be conquered, saw Arthur Vance's approach not as an admirable evolution, but as a dangerous contagion that threatened the established order. In his own opulent office, a monument to corporate warfare. Thorne watched a local news segment highlighting Vance Automotive's community initiatives and glowing customer testimonials. He scoffed a dismissive wave of his hand, scattering invisible dust motes. Integrity, compassion. In car sales, he snarled to his cowering marketing director. "The man's a sentimental fool playing at business, or worse, he's making us all look bad. Time to show Mr. Vance how the real game is played." The Thorne offensive began subtly, then escalated with brutal efficiency. Full-page newspaper ads and blaring radio spots for Thorne Motors screamed, "Unbeatable prices! We'll crush any deal!" The asterisks leading to a labyrinth of fine print that would make a seasoned lawyer weep. Then came the online whispers, anonymous forum posts questioning Vance Automotive's solvency. Heard they're giving away the store won't last long. Carefully planted customer reviews detailing fictional negative experiences. Thorne even made overtures to some of Vance Automotive's top-performing and ethically retrained salespeople, dangling impossibly high commission rates. Arthur, Ben, and Frank watched Thorne's tactics with a mixture of disgust and grim determination. "He's trying to drag us down into the mud with him," Ben observed, scrolling through a particularly nasty online smear campaign. "Standard Thorne playbook," Frank grunted. "All sizzle, no steak, and a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. He did this to Henderson's Auto over in West County a few years back. Gutted them." Arthur, however, refused to be drawn into a race to the bottom. "We don't fight fire with fire when the other side is using dirty fuel," he told his team. "We fight it with water. Clear, honest, and transparent." Vance Automotive doubled down on its commitment to ethical practices. Ben Cooper, with a surprising flair for media, spearheaded a series of short, engaging online videos. Car Buying 101, Don't Get Burned, and Decoding Dealership Double Talk. They never mentioned Thorn Motors by name, but the targets of their myth-busting were clear. One video featuring Frank Murray, with a deadpan expression, explaining the magical disappearing trade-in value trick, even went mildly viral in the local community. Then something unexpected began to happen. The fan club, as Ben privately called them, started to mobilize. Samuel and Eleanor Peterson, having heard whispers of Thorn's attacks, wrote a heartfelt letter to the editor of the local paper, recounting their experience with art and the integrity of Vance Automotive. Mims, Evans, now a staunch advocate, took to local online forums, robustly defending the dealership and sharing details of her refund and the CEO's personal apology. Sarah Jenkins posted a tearful, grateful video about how Vance Automotive had helped her out of a cripplingly unfair contract. Their authentic voices, filled with genuine gratitude, began to cut through Thorn's manufactured noise. Eleanor Peterson even baked a batch of what she called her Truth Triumphs cookies and delivered them to the dealership, telling Arthur, "You keep fighting the good fight, young man. Us old folks are tougher than we look, and we know a good heart when we see one." Marcus Thorn, unaccustomed to such grassroots resistance, grew increasingly frustrated. His usual tactics weren't just failing, they seemed to be backfiring, galvanizing support for his rival. "This Vance," he raged to his team. "He's like some kind of folksy Teflon. Saint nothing sticks. We need to escalate. Find something real. Or if you can't find it, make it." The blow, when it came, was far more vicious than Arthur had anticipated. Late one Friday afternoon, as the dealership was buzzing with weekend shoppers, Ben Cooper burst into Arthur's temporary office, his face pale, holding up his phone. "Sir, Mr. Vance, you need to see this." It was the headline of a sensationalist online news portal, known for its clickbait and loose relationship with facts. Vance Automotive, scandal exposed, CEO's ethical makeover. A sham reports of unsafe vehicles sold to unsuspecting families. The article, filled with anonymous sources and blurry, out-of-context photos, alleged that Vance Automotive, under Arthur's new honest regime, was knowingly selling dangerously defective, superficially repaired write-offs as certified pre-owned vehicles. It hinted at a cover-up at a CEO more interested in PR than public safety. It was a meticulously crafted dagger aimed straight at the heart of everything Arthur had been trying to build. Arthur read the article, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just business. This was personal. This was an attack on his integrity, his father's legacy. He looked up at Ben, whose youthful optimism seemed to have momentarily deserted him, and at Frank, who stood grimly in the doorway. "All right, Thorn," Arthur said, his voice quiet but dangerously calm, the earlier humor completely gone. "You wanted a war. You've just declared it." He stood up, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "But you're going to find out that fighting with the truth as your ally is a very different kind of battle." The dealership, which had just begun to breathe freely, was suddenly plunged into its most serious crisis yet. The air in the hastily arranged press conference crackled with a mixture of skepticism and anticipation. Reporters, local news crews, and even a few curious onlookers filled the Vance Automotive showroom, the very space that had only months ago been a theatre for Victor Stratton's deceptions. Arthur Vance stood before them, not with the polished artifice of a CEO in damage control, but with the quiet, resolute bearing of a man armed with the truth. Ben Cooper, looking older and more composed than his years, stood to his right, a tablet loaded with data in hand. Frank Murray, surprisingly dapper in a rarely worn suit jacket, stood to his left, a silent bastion of support. "Good morning, Arthur," began his voice, steady, amplified by the microphone. "I understand you're here because of some rather sensational allegations made against Vance Automotive and myself. Allegations of selling unsafe vehicles, of betraying customer trust." He paused, letting the weight of the accusation hang in the air. "I'm here to tell you that those allegations are false, and I'm here to show you why." What followed was not a performance of outrage or a plea for sympathy, but a methodical, transparent presentation of facts. Ben Cooper navigated through digital records, impeccable service histories for every certified pre-owned vehicle, sold independent safety inspection reports, glowing customer testimonials that directly contradicted the anonymous smears. Arthur himself spoke not of profit margins or market share, but of his father's principles, of his own undercover experience, of the difficult but necessary changes implemented at the dealership. He then calmly deconstructed the so-called evidence presented in the online smear piece, highlighting inconsistencies, doctored images, and suspiciously vague sources. Marcus Thorne and Thorne Motors. Arthur stated his gaze, sweeping across the room, operate on a business model that thrives in the shadows, that relies on misinformation and high-pressure tactics. When we chose to bring light and honesty into our dealings, it threatened that model. This attack is not just on Vance Automotive. It's an attack on the very idea that a business can succeed through integrity. The turning point came unexpectedly. A young woman, her face pale but resolute, stepped forward from the back of the room. "My name is Chloe Davison," she said, her voice trembling slightly but clear. "Until yesterday, I was a junior marketing assistant at Thorne Motors. I was part of the team instructed to fabricate aspects of the story against Mr. Vance." Gasps rippled through the room. Chloe produced a flash drive. This contains emails, internal memos, instructions from Mr. Thorne's senior management detailing the smear campaign. I couldn't live with it. The fallout for Marcus Thorne was swift and catastrophic. Chloe Davison's evidence, coupled with Arthur's transparent defense, painted a damning picture. Investigations were launched. Other businesses previously bullied into silence by Thorne found the courage to speak out. Customers deserted Thorne Motors in droves, their trust irrevocably broken. Within months, the once mighty Thorne Motors was a hollow shell. Its dealerships shuttered its reputation in tatters. Vic Stratton, it was briefly reported, was last seen trying to sell extended warranties for a dubious online electronics retailer. His glory days a distant, bitter memory. Vance Automotive, however, flourished. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the dealership stood stronger, its foundations of trust now tempered like steel. Customers, old and new, flocked to them, drawn by the story of a company that had not only admitted its past failings, but had fought a public battle for its integrity, and won. Ben Cooper, now a respected and innovative sales director, often joked that their most effective marketing campaign had been run unintentionally by Marcus Thorne himself. Frank Murray, his old cynicism completely vanquished, found immense satisfaction in training new recruits. His favorite line being, "Forget everything you think you know about car sales. Here we do it differently. We do it right." And yes, he'd add with a twinkle in his eye, the coffee is also significantly better. A year later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur Vance found himself standing on a familiar tree-lined street. He watched as Samuel Peterson, his eyes bright with pride, carefully maneuvered a beautifully restored, gleaming sedan, Jimmy's dream car, to the front of a small procession. It was the annual town fair, and the classic car adorned with ribbons was leading the children's parade. Eleanor Peterson sat beside Samuel, waving joyfully to the cheering crowd, her face a beacon of happiness. She spotted Arthur in the crowd and blew him a kiss. Arthur had ensured the car was meticulously restored by Vance Automotive's top technicians, a quiet gift with no strings attached. The Petersons in turn had made it a beloved feature of their community, a symbol not just of their son's memory, but of unexpected kindness and renewed hope. Later, back at the flagship dealership, now a vibrant hub of positive energy, Ben Cooper brought Arthur a cup of coffee. "Perfectly brewed, Mr. Vance," Ben said with a grin. "You know, I think I finally got the hang of it, mostly by not following your initial, experimental techniques from your art days." Arthur laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that reached his eyes. "Some skills, Ben, are best left to the professionals. I'll stick to running the company, you stick to ensuring our customers, and I get decent coffee." Frank Murray, overhearing them, chuckled. "At least no one's calling security on the coffee quality anymore, eh?" Art Arthur. Vance looked around the bustling showroom at the smiling faces of his staff, at the customers chatting comfortably, at the palpable sense of trust that filled the air. On the main wall, where once a giant photo of Vic Stratton had hung, there was now a simple, elegant plaque. It read, "Vance Automotive. Where our word is our bond, and our customers are our journey." He had faced the shadows within his own company and the predatory attacks from without. The scars he knew would always remain a reminder of the battles fought. But they were overshadowed by an immense sense of peace, of a purpose fulfilled. He hadn't just saved a dealership. He had reclaimed a legacy, and in doing so, had perhaps found the true measure of his own success. Not in figures on a balance sheet, but in the currency of compassion and the enduring strength of trust. Arthur Vance's journey reminds us that our true north isn't always found on a map of profits, but in the quiet courage to choose integrity even when the path is steep. How often, perhaps, does a single act of genuine care, a moment of choosing principle over personal gain, have the power to mend not just a broken system, but our collective faith in each other? These chances for quiet heroism, these small yet significant choices, might just be unfolding all around us every single day. This story of earned trust and profound transformation truly resonated deeply with our team here. What were your biggest takeaways from Arthur's stand? Which moment in Arthur's unwavering fight for honesty, or perhaps the community's heartwarming rally of support, moved you the most? We'd love to read your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We also genuinely welcome your constructive feedback on our storytelling, whether it's about this narrative, the characters, or any ideas you have for future stories. Your insights help us grow and bring you even more impactful content every day. If Arthur's journey and the spirit of Vance Automotive touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who you feel might find a little inspiration or hope within its message. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you can join us as we continue to explore more stories that matter together. Thank you for watching and for being a part of our community. Until next time, keep seeking the good in every story.